I will make noises like about 100 miles out.
Amelia Mary Earhart was born July 24th, 1897. She was the daughter of Samuel Edwin Staton Earhart and Amelia Otis. She was part German. She was born in Hatchinson, Kansas, in the home of her maternal grandfather, Alfred Gideon Otis, who was a former federal judge and the president of Hatchinson Savings Bank and a leading citizen in the town. Amelia was the second child of the marriage after an infant stillborn birth. Also, Amelia wasn't a very bright girl. She didn't start school till she was 12 years old, whereas she entered the seventh grade, although she did read a lot of books. Then later entered Central High School, and she wasn't really very happy there either, or anywhere. She finally graduated barely at Chicago Hyde Park School in 1916, but Earhart was still confused, so she decided to go to junior college in Algonquin School, Rideau. She dropped out of that school too. You see, her family had money, but with her father being an alcoholic and forced to go to rehab, but her grandmother, however, Amelia Otis, did leave a substantial amount of money. With all of this at hand, she was a free spirit. She became a nurse's aide, and this is when the Spanish flu was spreading, which she herself became infected. Later on, Amelia and a friend visited an air fair held in conjunction with the Canadian National Exposition in Toronto. This is when she became intrigued. But she decided to go to Smith College, but changed her mind again and enrolled at Columbia University in a course in medical studies, among other programs. But she quit that too in a year because she got it like that. However, well, had it like that. However, later her father and her visited an airfield where she was finally given a ride, and it forever changed her life. She took many lessons and then later bought her own. Yeah, because she had it like that, and named it Lockheed. And that's when she decided to take a trip around Atlantic. Why? Because she had it like that. She also then married, finally, after several times of him proposing, George P. Putnam. Anyway, let's move on. We all know that Amelia was known for getting lost, but no one knew why, because it was told she kept eating back where she started. But this didn't transpire until after the North America trip. She didn't start getting lost until she decided to take a trip around the world. The first trip she had alleged engine problems. The second trip she got lost and they blamed it on the wind current, but she managed to complete it though. The real reason was because the globe map that she followed wasn't accurate. It was told that she had to draw the map on a flat surface just to get the coordinates right, and she was often complaining how the world drew map wasn't right. Problem number one. It seems that after their departure from Lade Airfield headed toward their next destination on Holland Island, a tiny U.S. owned island that was just a few miles long, the U.S. Department of Commerce had a weather observation station and a landing strip on the island, and the staff was ready with fuel and supplies. Several U.S. ships, including the Coast Guard cutter of Itasca, were deployed to aid Earhart and Noonan in this difficult leg of their journey. As the Lockheed approached the Holland Island, Earhart radioed the Itasca and explained that she was low on fuel. However, after several hours of frustrating attempts, the two-way communication was only briefly established, and the Itasca was unable to pinpoint Lockheed's location or offer navigational information. Earhart circled the Itasca position but was unable to sight the ship, which was sending out mouths of black smoke. She radioed 1/2 hour fuel and no landfall, and later tried to give information on her position. Soon after, Earhart was lost, and Earhart presumably tried to land the Lockheed on the water. If her landing on the waters was perfect, Earhart and Noonan might have had time to escape the aircraft with a life raft and survival equipment before it sank. An intensive search of the vicinity by the Coast Guard and the U.S. Navy found no physical evidence of the flyers or their plane. As we all know, the last reports were near Howland Island, a last known report near Nukamanu Islands, whereas she radioed being lost. Once again, the globe map wasn't accurate. Let's be realistic here. This was the last known place whereas anyone heard from her. Here are the conspiracy, but first let me paint a picture. Okay. People say that she had engine problems, aside from getting lost and that she sunk somewhere in the Atlantic. But here's the problem with that. Amelia airplane was equipped with the best radio signals, antenna, and diving equipment, life jacket, and all of it. Well, for that time. But it was the geography by Don Dwiggins of Paul Metz who assisted Earhart and Noonan in their flight planning. Noted that the avatars had cut off their long wire antenna. She also radioed in several times, as we know. She just couldn't find or understand the coordinates and the map directions. Once again, they were incorrect.
As the frantic and fruitless search for Amelia continues, the world may not have heard the last from her. Within hours of her disappearance, distress calls are reported by professional radio operators and later by amateurs with shortwave sets around the Pacific and across the United States. Eventually, more than 100 reports come in, and the Navy and news media take them seriously, looking for clues. If Amelia is using her radio, she must be on land. To charge her batteries, she has to run the Electra's right engine, and it can't run unless the propeller is above water. On the night of July 3rd, calls apparently from Amelia are picked up by Pan Am Airways direction finding stations at Midway, Oahu, and Wake Island. When they track the signals to their source, it's in the Phoenix Islands, which includes Gardner, now called Nikamororo. Some of the messages could help pin down Amelia's whereabouts. In Rock Springs, Wyoming, 16-year-old Dana Randolph claims to have picked up a call from Amelia, who says she is on a reef south of the equator. A woman in eastern Canada says she hears Amelia saying that the navigator is badly injured. Perhaps the most intriguing report comes from St. Petersburg, Florida. Betty Clank was a teenager in 1937. She often spent the afternoon listening to her family's shortwave radio, which was hooked up to a powerful antenna. And she kept a notebook handy to jot down the titles and lyrics of songs she liked. One July afternoon, while searching the dial, she hears a familiar voice.
The first thing I heard was, "This is Amelia Earhart." That startled me. She said it several times, and I recognized that voice when I heard it.
Betty shared her notebook and her memories of that day with Rick Gillespie in an interview for the Tiger Archives. She recalled that she listened for 2 hours as the signal faded in and out, and she took notes on what she heard.
She was hurting. There was something terribly wrong.
It was a voice of desperation, of a woman in grave danger. Betty heard a man's voice too. She believes he was injured, and there were sounds of a struggle.
You could hear him, but you couldn't make out what he was saying. But you could tell that she was trying to keep him away from the radio. And they wrestled around when he would try to get on.
It reads like a modern transcript of a 911 call. There's confusion. There's things going on in the background.
Betty remembers thinking she heard Amelia say New York City, and she wrote that down.
And then she writes, or something that sounds like New York. Norwich City. Where we think the plane landed on the reef is right near the shipwreck, the Norwich City. And so you think of Earhart and Noonan on this island, if they don't know the name of the island, and they want to communicate the one thing about this island that is unique and the piece of information they can give, there's a shipwreck there. And the name of the ship is the Norwich City.
Betty's notes about rising water would make sense if the plane were parked on the reef, subjected to shifting tides. At the time she was listening, it was nearly noon on the island. The interior of the metal plane would have been broiling hot, which could explain the injured man's desperation to get out.
He was so uncomfortable and so miserable that they would just talk. And then he would kind of get out of his head again.
The transcriptions in her notebook give us almost too intimate a picture of what was going on that reef. These people were in horrible trouble.
Some have questioned how Amelia's signals could have traveled thousands of miles to be picked up by a few random listeners in North America.
You're telling me that this young woman was the only person in the entire world that heard those communications? That doesn't seem reasonable or logical to me.
But it is possible. The kind of radio that Amelia had on her plane often created extra signals called harmonics at multiples of the original frequency. Those harmonics can bounce off the ionosphere and travel vast distances. Radio expert Bob Brandenburg believes that Amelia's normal daytime frequency of 6,210 kilohertz would generate harmonics that could reach Betty's receiver.
Those very high frequencies propagate very well. And so the way Betty described the signal, fading in and out, is exactly consistent with the way that signal would behave at that frequency being transmitted from Gardner Island.
Finally, the signal faded out completely. The voices were gone.
I don't know how long I sat there. I'd say probably, knowing me, I probably waited an hour. We never heard anymore.
Betty may be the last person ever to have heard Amelia Earhart alive. And if she really did, chances are good that Amelia was calling from Nikamororo.
Okay, there was a rumor that was floating around for decades that she was captured by the Japanese and they held her captive for decades. There was even a cell where she etched her name in one of the Japanese jails. There was even a photo taken that seems to be with her sitting alongside of the dock with the aircraft being dragged out of the water in the distance, with also her companion Noonan standing near. But let's examine the photo closer. Amelia is seen without a shirt, it seems, and her companion seems to be fully dressed and leaning against the pole like he has no worries of the world. Meanwhile, Amelia appeared to be half naked, I say again, looking off to the right at her airplane being dragged out of the water. But the question is why doesn't she have on a shirt? It seems because her flight companion looks fully clothed and dry. Another thing, who took this picture? Why was it marked as evidence? Now, this rumor is that Amelia was warned many times to not go on any more flights. She was making a lot of headlines and a lot of men were pissed. So the government and the FBI agent Hoover conspired with some people to rig her plane so she can appear once again as getting lost and eventually crash. But here's the twist. Amelia radioed in several times and the island in which she landed on were initially going to help her, hence the photo. But when the word got back prior to her being locked in a jail, in a Japanese jail there is, of what her true agenda was, the U.S. government official told them she was wanted and for them to keep her. But they did more than that. They killed her, also under orders. This photo was sent to the U.S. as evidence of whom they had. Amelia never left that island, and her plane was rumored to have been burned and dumped, pretty much destroyed. But the question is why? Now, a lot of people don't seem to believe the whole flat earth thing, but take a look at this.
The flat Earth model is a working model. It's by no means definitive due to the nature of this massive cover-up. For the past 500 years, we've been completely buying into the Copernicus heliocentric model, but what we do know about the flat Earth is based on the azimuthal equidistant map that seems to be working out. This map goes as far back as the year 1000 and possibly earlier, now used as an official map by the U.S. Geological Survey and also as the official logo for the United Nations. Is this our real home being hidden from us in plain sight? I think it is. The first thing a lot of people say is, where's the edge? Well, look at this map where Antarctica is a 360-degree ice barrier that holds the water in. These ice walls are real, and they stand 150 feet above the surface of the water. Then you need to understand that there is no independent access to Antarctica. Average people can only go there on a guided tour. It has no towns, no cities, and no permanent residences. What's past the 150-foot ice wall is anyone's guess. How far the ice extends, how it terminates, and what exists beyond it. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 by 12 nations and more later on, states that Antarctica is for peaceful purposes only. No military activities, just scientific research and government exploration. Expeditions by any party must be discussed in advance. It's the longest and most successful treaty between nations. The treaty also states that there are ships, stations, and equipment to ensure compliance of the treaty. Sounds like military activity to me. Anyway, so this azimuthal equidistant map appears to be correct for the most part. Over the centuries, there's been other maps that look pretty close to it as well. Let's look at an interesting story that was recently in the news that supports this flat map. A woman gave birth on a flight from Bali to Los Angeles, so the flight made an emergency landing in Alaska. Here's what it would look like on a globe. Now, here's what it would look like on a flat Earth. Which one makes more sense? Exactly.
Okay, Amelia was starting to see that the Earth map wasn't real and her coordinates were all wrong. She was going by her map, but her map was taking her to the opposite direction. Why? Who knows? Because the Earth is flat, and at that time, they had no idea where the hell anything was aside from America. Everything else was literally guessed and made the hell up and seriously embellished. It was told that what forever be hidden, that she kept saying that the earth looks flat and not round and that nothing seems to be as it should or where it should be. She was rumored that she was going to write a book on some findings and the true element of the earth. A big hell no. Remember the planes were becoming really popular, was starting to become really popular, and people were starting to see that the current globe map was not quite accurate, and the lines got crossed when some explorers were starting to see these lines. So that's when NASA, the Antarctic Treaty became developed. They didn't want their entire existence and lines to be revealed, not to mention other landmass aside from what we are taught that Richard E. Byrd revealed that was there, that coincidentally coincides to the start of the Antarctic Treaty and NASA became founded. But this whole thing actually started with Amelia Earhart, a woman whom they killed to hide their secret.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.